Here. So I want to get started with the first presentation, which is the Policy Implementation Experience Report. And I will have ARIN's new Senior Director of Registration Services, John Sweeting, come on up. Right click to advance.
Yes. Thanks, John. I always prefer to be called new than old, even though it's pretty true. Okay, welcome back from lunch, everyone. I hope everyone had a great lunch and enjoyed it. I'm going to give a quick presentation on Policy Experience Report and what I'm going to talk about. I only have one to talk about, and it's going to be the waiting list policy, which is in the NERPM. It is 418, unmet requests. This policy was implemented in January 2010. But we didn't have to use it until July 2015. That was the first request that could not be filled from the free pool and ended up going on the waiting list. So so what it says right there, justified requests that can't be met, they have the option of being added to the waiting list. The way to get on there, if it's initial, you can qualify for a /21 if you're an ISP, or a /24 if you're an end user. That's approved without justification. Larger blocks can be approved, but they're based on a 24-month justified need. You can also, if you qualify for, say, a 16, you can say the minimum you'll accept is 17, a 19, a 20, and that way, if one of those block sizes become available, you can be offered that. But if you say, no, the smallest I'll take is a 16, then if no 16s become available, you will get skipped over on the waiting list for a block. If a 20 became available, it would go to the first person that was willing to accept a /20. And of course, oldest requests are filled first. Okay, so some of the other rules around it. Each org, you can only have one request on the list at a time. Any requests that are met by transfer are removed, and by met it means if you go out and get any address space through the transfer process, you are removed from the wait list. Once a block becomes available, you'll be notified on the wait list. You'll have 60 days to pay the registration fee and sign the RSA if that's required, if you aren't currently have a current RSA signed. There is some basic revalidation done. That's just basically making sure that your organization is still active, that your account is current, you're not behind in paying, and a few other things. Normally, there is no additional justification required unless you've recently completed an 8.2, say, merger and acquisition transfer, and you told us that you acquired, say, a /12 in that merger and acquisition, and 0% of that is being used, and you're on the waiting list for maybe 16 or something. We are actually going to then ask you to justify why you really need that 16 after you've acquired a 12 that you're not using. But for the most part, additional justification is not required. And there is a 3-month waiting. Once you get a request filled, you then have to wait 3 months before you can be added to the end of the waiting list again. So some of the items I'm going to review real quick here are the waiting list outcomes, wait time, review process, and disaggregation. Man, I sent the wrong. Okay, so good news is that it's working. Of 622 requests that have been added to the wait list since July 2015, 195, or 31% of those, have been filled. 136 of them have been closed and removed from the list. Most of those were they got space through the transfer market. There was 2 that opted not to accept the block, and 2 that didn't pay the registration fee within the 60 days of time limit. And there's currently today there's 291 that are still waiting. The oldest one of those being 31 July 2015, which was a /16. Of the 195 filled requests, the average time to fill them was 15 months, median was 17 months, the longest wait was 24 months. And of the 136 closed requests, average time was 7 months, median 5 months, and the longest wait time 21 months, and that was filled via a transfer. So we have a very strict review process for the wait list, as returned and revoked blocks. We have a couple of analysts that go through and review those. They make sure that that they're not routed. If they're still routed, then we have some additional measures we have to take to make them available to be reissued. We also need verification the return or the revocation was done properly, which on the return there's a letter that has to be signed by an officer of the company saying, yes, we really do want to return these addresses to you. On a revocation, there's several steps in the process that our Val and her team take care of through FSD to make sure that everybody is given every chance they possibly can be given to pay that bill and not lose those resources. So we have to make sure that all those steps were followed. Then once we get a list of some space that has been deemed qualified to reissue, we'll hold a management team meeting. We'll have a legal review in there. There's 4 management team directors meet, myself from RSD, Val from FSD, Michael, who does the legal, and Nate. We all have to convince Nate that, hey, we've followed all the process on this and these are ready to be reissued. Nate then will either sign it or tell us to go back and do some more homework. Usually he'll sign them, but it's always good to have that last review there. Currently, we're reviewing 20 to 40 blocks each month. And there are 354 blocks that are currently in that process that have been returned, revoked, and are being reviewed. Now, there is a certain timeline. We wait 6 months past any blocks that's been revoked. It takes 6 months of that not being paid before they get revoked, and then we wait an additional 6 months before we even review them to reissue them. So on the this is just a chart that shows you there was 138 prefixes have become available to be given back out, and we ended up breaking that into, it ended up 195 prefixes that were reissued. So there was a gain of like 50% on that. So not too bad, but I guess not in this whole scheme of things, that's not too bad. So that brings me to the last slide, some policy issues to consider. So while the current mechanism is working, but it does highlight the question of what is the underlying goal of the waiting list. Is it to provide timely way to actually match an IPv4 block supply to the demand of qualified recipients? Well, the answer to that is it's not really timely, as some entries are multiple years old, and their original need gets overtaken by events, satisfied by transfer market. So, should the waiting list entries last indefinitely? And the other question is, or should we use the waiting list to provide a last resort for organizations that actually need a small amount of IPv4 resources, and they can't even participate in the transfer market, maybe because they're a not-for-profit or they just don't have the means. So the current process doesn't seek to provide a minimum assignment to the maximum number of organization, but instead it allows the waiting for larger blocks. Also, it doesn't distinguish between organizations that lack the financial resources, smaller entities versus larger, and not-for-profits versus for-profit. So we would welcome any and all input on those 2 or 3 questions in there from the community to help us, manage the waiting list, and also, is this what the community really envisioned the waiting list was going to do, or is there, maybe a policy change that's required? So, with that, David.
Hey, John. David Huberman from Oracle. Can you go back 3 slides, please? There you go. My first question is, absent any clearer and precise guidance from policy in the future, at some point you'll catch up, and all the and the majority or all of the revoked and returned addresses that can meet these thresholds will be issued, and all you'll be left is some modern version of a swamp, of squatted on space, on routed space, on space that's stuck on block lists or whatever. Absent any policy advice, does ARIN plan on doing anything with this space? Or have you not thought about it? Or what happens to all the space that's just stuck?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Curran.
When you say just stuck, you mean cannot be resolved?
Doesn't meet these thresholds.
Right.
Because, for example, we'll use a simple example. A /16 that's being routed by someone, and you don't know why they're routing it.
Right. Okay. So we try not to do harm. And so that means that when we do return and revocation, we're really trying to make sure there's no harmed party by us taking this action. At some point, we'll catch up with all the backlog. We'll collect everything out there. We won't be issuing effectively. There'll be nothing new coming into the waiting list. The IANA will be done. Now, are you asking at that point, what's the useful waiting list program? Or you're asking a different question, which is, at that point, what happens to address blocks that we can't clean up? Well, they remain in their current state, by definition.
Okay.
And that's probably what should happen, unless someone wants us to risk harm to organizations that might be innocent but just not aware we're even out there.
Okay, thank you.
Back mic, David Farmer.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota, ARIN AC. Go back forward a couple of slides to the what's the purpose slide. One more.
To the which one?
So what's the purpose? Policy issues to consider, and what's the underlying purpose? A sub-bullet you don't have there is, which is what I feel the underlying purpose of the waiting list policy is to ensure, to the greatest extent possible, that address blocks are not stuck in ARIN's pool someplace. And so it's to get them out of ARIN and get them into hands of people that can use them. These other considerations are secondary as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Back mic.
Austin Merklin from QCent Technologies. From a small business perspective, if you get targeted by DDoS attacks, your options are basically go CDN-based mitigation or some sort of routing through Scrubbing Center via multi-home setup. And if you don't already have /24, you can't participate in that. Somebody's been on that list for close to 2 years now, looking for a /16. They could easily have that be met by the transfer market, and if they want a /16, they probably can afford it. Whereas a small business usually isn't going to be needing a /16 or can't afford the transfer market current pricing. So my recommendation would be to just try to target giving small businesses an opportunity to get some more /24s when larger blocks become available.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you'd want to find an AC member somewhere during the meeting and talk to them about how to put in a policy proposal. Front mic. Go ahead, Owen.
Okay. Owen DeLong, Akamai, ARIN AC. I think that the existing waiting list policy was designed to try and balance fairness across all the people that, for whatever reason, decided that the transfer market wasn't the right avenue for them. Those that get transfers pop off the waiting list and get out of the queue, so not really a big deal there, no harm done. Those that, for whatever reason, don't or can't get transfers to meet their needs and are willing to wait as a last resort, so to speak, get to make their own decision about whether they wish to remain on the list or not, and I think that's the most fair thing we can do. I think that if we were to change the rules at this stage with so many people already on the list, there's no fair way to do that to the people on the list.
Thank you. Back, Mike.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. So in regards, I'll start with the second one. There's no way to fairly distinguish between not-for-profits, for-profits, all of that, and I really don't think that that's the area to go down. John, you did a recent blog post about Section 4.10 and being able to get a small block of IPv4 as long as you are needing it for your IPv6. So that is not going to have any cost implications other than doing the right thing and doing V6 and getting some V4 out of that. And that's the avenue I would push people towards rather than anything there. My bigger issue is actually with the first one, which is the assumption that you're getting on a wait list because you absolutely need this space right now, but it's okay to wait 2 to 3 to 5 to however many years to get the space. If you have to wait an indeterminate amount of time to get space, your need is not real because it doesn't make sense. It's a logic problem. So right now the pool is based on FIFO, first in, first out, right? It could just as easily be a lottery, which would probably be more fair than a FIFO scenario. But the question is, at this point, is it even worth changing? There's so little that is coming out of this, and you didn't provide aggregates. How much total space has been given out from the unmet list in total since its inception?
We don't have a total, but someone who wants to visually do that, my math foo is not up to that right now. It's
As you can see, it's somewhere around 63.
It's a 14 worth of space that's being given out, give or take.
/19 and /14. So about a 13 and 3/4.
Okay, so if the issue is that we're actually doing good by giving out really small blocks, that's maybe one area to go, which is to limit the size of the block that gets given out in the unmet to give more and more people, which is, I believe, what's being done in other regions with their soft landing. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I actually think FIFO is the biggest problem at this point.
Yeah, to that point, a /16, if there's the number one person on the wait list is looking for a /16, one person gets satisfied. If
Right.
it's a /24, 256 people get satisfied.
Understood.
By the way, I'm closing the queues, just so if you want to speak on this, please approach the queue.
Yeah, and just one other thing, Kevin, on the first in, first out, it's long as it matches the minimum size that you would accept. Otherwise, you get skipped over, that's all.
No, I understand. My issue with FIFO is that it's the people in this room who are in the know about this list who have an unfair advantage because they're on the list in the first place. Most average people don't know about this list.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, back, Mike.
Joe Oliveri, Root Level Technology, Houston. I think a couple questions for clarification. One is the /24s are available, so if you're looking for a /24, ARIN has them available for you. It's just to implement IPv6, and it doesn't cost you anything. You just have to, and that's what he was saying. But there's not a lot of information about that. When I went to ARIN on the road, was the first time I heard about that, and I think ARIN could do a little bit better job advertising that for the smaller companies, and it also helps to implement IPv6. A point of clarification question that I have is the /16 is not going to get a /16 until one's available. But if /18s or /20s come available, everybody lower than that is going to get their IPv4, correct?
It depends on who's in the queue. If the 18's in the queue and waiting before the 19s and 20s are,
Correct.
it would go to the 18.
But we're not just stagnant waiting for a /16 to come in to do the first one. It's
No. We
I
skip.
think
We
that's a
skip over.
misunderstanding then
Right.
with some
We
in
skip.
the room.
You specify what range you're willing to wait for, and
Right.
we check every queue position when a block becomes available.
And I think another question that you were asking was, we're not just looking at one person getting served. There's 195 that's been served already on the waiting list, correct?
Correct.
With the smaller ranges, and
Yes.
just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Yeah, there's actually been a few 16s that have been issued. Jason, last one.
Jason, Jason Schiller, Google, ASOAC. A lottery is a terrible idea because it gives the impression that it's worthwhile to keep submitting requests because I could possibly win the lottery. I think it's much better to understand that there's potentially a 2 or 3 or 4 year wait to get that space. And with respect to, is the need valid if they can wait 2 years? I don't see that as necessarily being true. Certainly someone could have a valid need. They could have a valid need such that it justifies the cost of spending the money on transfers. Or their valid need could not justify that cost, but it is still valid, and they're going to sit and wait until addresses become available, and they could be potentially holding off a deployment. So I don't think just because someone waits 2 years means they don't need the space.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.